One young lady asked, is there a cure for OCD?
There is no cure. There's recovery. There is what's called ERP, so it's exposure response prevention, and it's basically the idea that anxiety is going to be there, and with OCD, it's really all about the uncertainty. So, most people think OCD. They think you have to touch something 10 times. Yes, that's one form of OCD. We'll stick with it and say, okay, if you touch something 10 times, that's often associated with a fear. So somebody's fearful that if they don't touch something a certain amount of times, something bad will happen, right? So the idea behind ERP is, okay, let's face the anxiety, because if you think about it, anxiety prevents you from doing certain things. So the only way that anxiety stays as strong as it is when you listen to it. So if you face it, you're doing the exact opposite. You're facing it head on. You're not giving it its power. So the ERP for somebody who touches something 10 times because they're afraid of something bad happening is touch it 9 times and handle the anxiety and prove to yourself and see that nothing bad happens and the anxiety is in your head and you are capable of facing it. Now, doing this with a therapist is obviously recommended because the anxiety can be so strong. But eventually you start to touch it 8 times and then 7 and then 6, and you go down to 1. And each time it might get harder. It's called riding the wave of anxiety, and it's going to increase before it decreases. So it's really starting to say, okay, it's like backwards thinking, because for OCD, you want to touch it because you think that you're preventing something from happening, but you're only keeping that thought alive because you keep doing that pattern, right? So that's why it's terrifying when people say you're facing your fears right there. So touching it 9 times, no one wants to do that if that's your OCD. But once you conquer that, you're conquering the anxiety. OCD is an anxiety disorder. So it's anxiety that's the manifestation. So there's no cure specifically, but there are ways that you start to handle the anxiety. And there are ways that you start to realize that you might ask your mom and say, can you touch this for me? Because I need you to touch it for me. And that's called reassurance. So the less you do that, the more you start to prove to yourself that your ultimate fear is not going to come to fruition, is not based in reality. It is just a thought. And OCD is our reaction to thoughts. So we touch something 10 times because we're afraid of our own thought, right? So the idea is to lessen the anxiety each time you do it. For me, it was facing the thoughts of commitment, facing certain thoughts that were bothering me, and handling those thoughts. So now when they come up in my life, I can say, there's OCD again, or I don't know right now, and that's okay. And the anxiety will lessen. Anxiety doesn't really go away, but your reaction to the anxiety just gets less.